Hey folks, Storm here with another figure for you guys. Here we're doing Magik, and this sculpture is brought to us by Wicked Studios. This is probably, if not the largest model or figure or anything that I've ever built before and painted. This thing is bigger than a 1/16 scale tank. It is just massive. There are loads of details and textures on this model, and it was a very unique experience because of the flames that we have here and Magik's glowing sword. So what we're going to do today is learn a little bit about painting flames, painting object source lighting. So we're going to be casting light from our objects such as the fire and Magik's sword, and we're also going to be looking at how we can make Magik's sword look like it's glowing without putting any LEDs in. So let's unpack those details, shall we? So to start, we have to assemble our model, and I did use some epoxy to fill in a few gaps, which is very typical on a model, especially when you have a lot of pieces coming together. And then the next step is to actually prime it in black. Now, why do we prime our models, and why do we prime them in black? If we don't prime our model, we're expecting our paint to adhere to our resin here. So we don't want to take that chance. What we want to do is prime it in black so we have a nice base for our paint to adhere to and to create some shadows and use it to start making tones. So in here, what I'm doing is I'm actually dry brushing some metallics over top of that black. And whenever you're painting metallics, you always want to have a black base because it actually helps the metallics shine more, as you can see here, where I'm just dry brushing a silver metallic dry brush paint over top of the black lettering here, and you can see how it's just popping out, and that's because we have that nice black background to start. And that's why I always prime in black. I do not prime in white, I do not prime in gray, I always prime in black. Now the next step, what you see I'm doing, I had dry brushed kind of some rusty tones on there, and when I say rust I mean like exposed metal looking colors, like a dark brown, and then I'm going over with some silver to create some highlights. This base has a lot going on to it, so we don't need to go overly crazy with the details on these small chains and stuff because that's not going to be the focal point. Now, these horns here on the front and this flame, I did a little bit of experimenting off screen, and you can see my results here. So you can see what I did was I just sprayed white and basically put in yellow, orange, and red, and the overspray essentially acts as object source lighting. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, because I want to teach you guys a little bit about OSL, and I'm going to show you guys in a later video when I do spawn. You'll see a really good example of OSL and flames that I kind of perfected. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss out on that spawn video. So after I have this base all primed in black and I kind of figured out my recipe for making flames, now I'm ready to start prepping this model. And what we need to do is bring out the details of this dragon that's coming out of this portal to Limbo. We know that this model has a lot of fire on it, and as I mentioned, a lot of object source lighting, so we need something for that light to catch, and we don't want to make it too bright or else the light bits won't stand out. So what I did was I just dry brushed this entire base to help bring out all the textures, bring out all the raised details. And what that's going to do, because I used a gray color, is it's actually going to allow the raised details to catch light and the shadowed areas to cast shadows. Again, this is our basis for our OSL that we're going to use later. It also adds a little bit of detail without us having to paint every little detail on this ginormous model. So you can see what I did next, just to give you my recipe that I kind of figured out for painting flames. And to be fair, this is the first time I've ever painted flames, so I know I made some mistakes here and I'll point them out as we go along. But essentially we start after the black primer base, we're going to paint the flames in white. And the reason we're going to paint them in white is because we're going to spray them then with yellow, as you can see here. And we want the yellow to shine, and if you just paint yellow over black, it'll just turn green. And that's one of the mistakes I made along the way, is I did not paint enough white. I used white paint. I should have mixed in some white inks as well, but unfortunately I actually didn't have white ink when I made this, when I first started making this. So again, I should have just used white ink and waited. But either way, you can see the next step was I used orange, and I did have some orange ink, and here again you can see how I'm feathering out the colors, very similar to what I'm going to do in Spawn in an upcoming video where he has green flames. Here we have typical fire flames. So it's orange in the middle and then red towards the tip. And then if you really want to go crazy, which I think I did do here, is I went over the very, very tip of each flame in like almost like a dark brown. So it kind of makes it look like the fire is fading off into nothing, like it really does. Now the OSL here, you can see I'm holding the model upside down, and this thing weighs like 5 pounds. And I'm just spraying the orange. I'm picking the mid-tone because fire's light is usually like an orange color. And I'm spraying it from the bottom up. In other words, I'm spraying from the direction that the flames are coming from. That's object source lighting. The spray coming out of your airbrush is the same as the light coming out of a flashlight. So the next up here was the eyes. You can see what I did was I dry brushed a little bit around the eyes, and then I sprayed with transparent red over the eyes after painting the eyes white, and that just helped make them glow. And when you use the transparent paint over the edges, it also acts like OSL a little bit and makes it look like it's glowing more. So next up we have Magik, right? Because the base is done, Magik is up next. We're going to do the same thing. Now I know you're probably wondering, well, why wouldn't we just paint Magik to make her look like she's all black? Well, if we only paint her black, like she normally is, her black suit, and we try to cast OSL on her, it won't show up. We need something to catch the light, okay? Like, you gotta think of like your airbrush like a flashlight. And if you shine a flashlight on something black, it's just black. But if you shine it on something with color, the color shows up. You're doing the same thing, but you're gonna be spraying high pigmented inks. That orange that I was using is orange fluorescent paint and ink, orange ink. Same thing we're gonna be doing here with her sword and whatnot. You'll see in a moment. We're going to use white ink because I did get white ink in while I was making this model. So again, you can see I'm just dry brushing all the armor parts with the same metallic as I did the base. And after I had her entire body just dry brushed, her suit dry brushed again to catch the OSL, then we went in to paint her skin tones. I tried a little bit different of a recipe because I wanted to go for some colder stuff and use something else that's different. And I found that these AK shadow fleshes and dark shadow fleshes colors, they're really good for making the base color. And you'll see I'll do something like this, or I have done something like this with Eve in the past. If you didn't see that video, there'll be links in the description. I did something very similar with Eve, and I used this shadow flesh back then. The only difference is I used more pink on Eve because I wanted her skin tones to be warmer, whereas here with Magik, I want her skin tones to be a little bit colder because we're going to be adding some cold OSL and some warm OSL all in the same model. So I don't want her to be too warm, or else I don't think it'll look right considering she's got blue coming from her. So again, you can see I used that shadow flesh in the recesses of her skin and like basically from the bottom to cover up the black. And here's where I probably should have painted white, but the paint was thick enough that it actually covered up the black pretty well. And I'm just using more AK flesh tones here to bring out the warm color of her face. Again, I should have painted pink underneath this first, pink and white like I normally do. I just forgot that step. Again, I was trying to go for colder tones, and what I should have done for colder tones was just painted it purple. But either way, it is what it is. It still turned out pretty good. And you can see our details in like her abs there. You can see how the shadows are still being formed there. And then what I did was I just brought a colder highlight skin tone over top of her face there just to help bring out more light. And again, it's because I want her face to catch the OSL, and if it's too warm, it won't catch that orange OSL from our dragon. So here you can see then the last step is to put in some of that medium flesh like you guys have seen me do plenty of times. It's like an orangish tone, like a peach tone, to kind of bring down those shadows a little bit and add in some cool colors. I think it turned out really nice. Here you can see on her face as well, just adding in those tones. Again, it's like a peachy color. I think it's like Vallejo's medium flesh is the one I've been using, but I found other versions of it that work just the same. So again, that's kind of the recipe for flesh. And once we have her flesh tones done, you can see I just used the dry brush technique all over her suit and her armor on her arm. And now we can put her all together. And then what I did, you can see she's covered in flames. I used the same technique for all the flames that I did on the base on her as well. And all I'm doing is bringing in oranges and adding in OSL. You can see I'm spraying from the direction of the flames onto her over top of everything. So this is where that gray dry brushing comes in handy, because now the gray and the lighter colors are catching the orange, catching the light that we're fakely making here, and it's bringing out this orange glow from only from a certain angle, which is where we get our object source lighting again. And we got to think of it just like light. Next up, we're going to work on her sword. And you can see I showed you guys the white ink I used. These AK inks are really nice. They come in dropper bottles. And I just sprayed the whole thing white after masking off the black part in the middle. And then I took some Citadel blue that I had and just kind of build up around the edges. And what I noticed looking at the reference, I actually thought it was going to be blue in the middle and then white on the outside, kind of like her yellow sword is, but it's not like that. The darkest part is right on the edge. I ended up actually mixing in some darker blue acrylics and just spraying the tip of the edge of the sword. And then I went back over the center with the white ink and white paint that I had mentioned before. And the idea is you want to make the edge of the sword, the very edge of the sword, very dark to make it glow. That's the trick. White for most of it, and then very dark on the tips. And if you look at the comics, that's how they always showed it. They always showed a dark tip on the end. So that's actually like her body there. We just have to finish up her head. You can see how like her body is encased in flames, so it's kind of like one whole unit there that we have to attach into the dragon's mouth. So this thing is massive, and it's very awkward to like try to handle, and you'll see that later. But anyway, finishing up her portrait just like I normally do. I used reddish flesh for her lips. You can use that shadow flesh I found in later models is actually a really good color as well. Here I tried a little trick where I painted her eyebrows black and then was going to go over them with a light brown, because again I was trying this idea out, and you'll see why here in a moment with her hair. But I just wanted to see if I could create some fake volume on her eyelashes. I don't think it really worked all that well, to be honest, because her eyelashes shouldn't be that much voluminous, because that's kind of, I don't know, weird, but whatever. Anyway, moving on. Her eyes. So we're not going to be painting her irises and everything. We're just going to paint her eyes white so it catches blue, because if you've ever seen Magik when she's, you know, got her sword out and everything, her eyes are always glowing blue. So in this case, what I did was I painted her blue to start with, so it's like blue around the edges of her eyes, and then what I did was I came back with the same white ink and white acrylic paint and just sprayed back over the center of her eyes. And just like the sword, right, we put the white in the middle, we put the blue around the edges, and it actually makes it look like her eyes are glowing, just like the sword looked like it was glowing. Oh, look, my airbrush looks shiny. Okay, there we go, there's her face. Now we can see how that effect works, and when you put this thing all together, the effect stands out more. Like when you look at this up close, and believe me, if you've ever done any of this painting before, any kind of modeling, you're looking at it up close and you're like, wow, this looks really weird. Sometimes you got to take a step back and you'll be like, oh, okay, I see it now, right? So you'll, if you didn't like those eyes, you'll see it when I put her on the base. So the next thing, this was a little trick I wanted to try. So I don't like painting hair in like one tone. So what I did was I painted her hair in this like mud brown color. And the point of that is, if you look at like a blonde, any blonde, it's never just yellow. It's always shades of like light yellows, dark yellows, and browns. So I painted her undertones a dark brown, and then I dry brushed with ice yellow, in this case, like a bright yellow on top. And what that does is it looks more natural to me, and it also doesn't look monotone. I mean, look how that hair turned out. It looks like blonde hair, at least a lot more, and there's some depth and volume to it in the areas where you can't dry brush and you get those brown shadows. So that's definitely a nice recipe, by the way, for blonde hair in the future, and that's going to be my go-to from now on. I'm not going to be airbrushing it anymore alone. I actually want to dry brush it brown and yellow because I think it looks so good. And here you can see I'm just putting this thing in place. We're not quite done yet, because remember, we have to put the OSL in for the sword, but I mean, just look at that. She's just sitting there, and look how the eyes look like they're glowing. That's not special effects, that's just paint. Now, again, I said OSL is the last step here. Once we have it all put together, we want to do OSL when it's put together. It just makes things a lot easier. And you can see what I'm doing is I took some white ink and some light blue paint, same thing as I use on her sword and her eyes, and I'm actually projecting this light blue color down onto the dragon
onto the back of her hair, onto the back of her hands, basically anywhere from that sword that's glowing blue. And the idea is just to add in more of that bluish, whitish OSL off of the sword.
So welcome to the fire. I'm the one with the lighter. Feel it burning through your veins as we're walking through the flames, getting higher. So welcome to the fire. Welcome to the fire.
If you guys like what you saw today, please like, comment, and subscribe to help me build this channel. Special shout out to my patrons for helping to support my work. If you're interested in joining the community, you can definitely do so over at Patreon, where I post daily updates, high resolution photos such as you're looking at here, and I also put out quick tips and exclusive videos on how to do what I'm doing at the bench, along with lots of insights. So definitely go check that out. And if you're looking to add one of these pieces to your collection, please check out my website at relentlessstormmodels.com and use code STORMYT2024 at checkout for 10% off. I also do offer unpainted kits as well if you're interested in that. So please check out my website there or on eBay and Etsy. Until next time.